Hello, I'm Leah Renee. This is episode 2 of my podcast. Podcasting is difficult because if you're trying a new medium and you want to experiment, it's hard to know that when you create something like a podcast and you put it out there, that you can't call it back. So it's hard to be really creative about something when you know it's going to be set in stone. The idea with creativity, I think, is that you should be able to feel free to experiment and try different things. And unfortunately, podcasting is pretty unforgiving. I've been thinking a lot about recording another podcast, mostly because when you search my name in Spotify or in the internet and you look up podcast, you'll probably find me on other podcasts. And I wanted to have something that was my own so that I get to pick the content. And I also want to practice podcasting on my own to get used to feeling like I can speak freely, but also remembering that choices have consequences and whatever I say, I can't call back. And I found that sometimes on podcasts, I'm very vulnerable. Vulnerable? That sounds cheesy. I've been on podcasts where I'm having a friendly chat with someone, and then I realize in hindsight that maybe what I shared could be taken the wrong way, or maybe I related an experience that I had with a friend or an acquaintance that if they found it, that they might be embarrassed. I'm trying to honor the privacy of my friends and family by not sharing things that they might find uncomfortable, which is difficult because I am someone who tends to be an open book, which is the thing that I wanted to talk about. Parasocial relationships and social media and how it has changed as a creative person with the ability, I would say people maybe in the entertainment industry, the creative industry is pretty broad. But there's this sense, especially with comedians, because comedians are somewhat expected now to gush and to tell you about their personal life. So if you go to a comedy show today, just a regular old comedy show, maybe at a club or a bar show or something, I can guarantee you there will probably be at least one, if not several comedians that relate a story about a Tinder date they had, or an argument they had with a parent, or something a sibling of theirs did. And it's very self-referential and autobiographical. That's sort of the trend right now. There are some character comedians out there, of course, and there are some really brilliant people who have curated a persona that allows them to be themselves without revealing a lot of really personal information. So if you're looking for a great comedian, the person I'm thinking of right now is Paul Foote. I love Paul Foote. He's fantastic. If you see his full show, the one that he has out right now, I'm trying to remember what it's called, but he's wearing a blue boiler suit in the poster. But he does reveal some things about himself, some deeply personal things. But generally speaking, Paul Foote has some fantastic long-winded bits about things like Shire horses and their decline. So he takes a topic that doesn't seem relevant or interesting, and he gets so passionate about it that it's hilarious. He's very eloquent. He has a great vocabulary. I love Paul Foote. And honestly, if you see him in person, he's quite clowny. His shows I don't want to ruin anything because I so deeply respect him. But I will say, go to his show. You will be surprised at the physicality of it because he's quite silly. And you don't really see that, certainly in his panel show appearances, but even his older stand-up. Or a lot of the clips that I had seen online of Paul Foote were of him at Live at the Apollo or something. Because it's such a large space and because it's filmed, he can't, jump off the stage and get in the aisles or whatever. But if you go to an Edinburgh Fringe show of his or any kind of show at a theater or something in the UK, like a smaller venue that might have between, 100 and 500 seats, maybe. Say 500? I would say, let's say between 80 and 200 seats. I think you're going to get a much better experience. So Paul Foot is an example of someone who you don't feel like you really know him in the way that if you watch a television show where someone's playing a character or see them in a movie, that you feel like you know who they are. And that's one of the problems with parasocial relationships. So as I understand it, parasocial relationships are where it's one-sided. So you'll have a musician or an actor or comedian or something, and they're well-known. They've put out enough work that you feel close to them. But if you met them in person, you know more about them than they know about you. Usually they know nothing about you. And so it creates this weird dynamic because you may have seen them in many hours of television or movies or whatever. Perhaps some of the things they said or did really touched you, so you feel very intimate and close to them. But you're a complete stranger, so they don't have that. And so it can be a really, I was going to say difficult, but I'll just say interesting experience as a performer to meet someone who just adores you, to have those kind of interactions. If you're doing a comedy show, you might have 300 people at the show, and then afterwards, they come up to you and they want to share with you. They want to share with you their experience, say, dealing with depression. This happened to Gary Gulman. He did a special called The Great Depression, and it was a beautiful piece of work. But a lot of people who would see it, it would change their life. And so they would come up to him after the show and they wanted to tell him how much he meant to them, and maybe even share something very personal, like a time that they were suicidal or something. But if you're Gary Gulman, you might have 20 people coming up to you, maybe even being emotional, sharing their experience of feeling suicidal. And it's a lot to deal with. I think the prevalence of social media means that those parasocial relationships can become even more extreme because you're putting out even more of yourself. If you look at an actor and they're in a film, back in the day, you would watch a movie, you would feel close to that character, that person. But that was usually all you saw of them until they did another movie, maybe in a year or two. And there might be pictures of them in People magazine or an article about them having a child or something, but you didn't see much of them. And now, because social media is so easy and cheap to create, you see a lot more of your performers. So before, where you were getting 2 hours of this person every other year, you could get 2 hours of them a day if they were like really on there, live streaming or whatever. So it's just changed the game. This happened to me when I was at Edinburgh Fringe. I ran into someone there that I really admired. They're an amazing comedian, performer, and so they're an amazing performer. They do sketch comedy. And it was interesting because it was weird to meet someone that I had seen play so many different characters. So I actually didn't feel like I had a parasocial relationship that I knew who they were, because their online personality is quite opaque. They don't really reveal who they are. If you know Tim Robinson from I Think You Should Leave, you watch his sketch comedy and the characters that he has are very distinct, but you know that it's not him. It's such an extreme character that it's hard to believe that that's what he's actually like. And so if you see him on a late night show or something, you can tell he's definitely a different person than most of the characters that he plays. So to meet Tim Robinson, I wouldn't expect him to be the characters that I had seen him play. And partly because I don't really see a lot of him, who he is as a person. I feel the same way about Tim and Eric, perhaps, that they're not really showing who they are in a vulnerable, maybe Eric a little bit more, but even Tim has a podcast and he doesn't talk about himself a whole lot. He's still kind of an abstract, goofy guy, even on the podcast. I met this performer and I felt starstruck, but not close to them. And it was a really interesting experience. Even I was catching a bus and we were chatting. And he's the one that brought up parasocial relationships. And it was funny because I felt like I would have felt that way if he were playing one of the characters that he plays, more than just being himself, because I haven't really seen him as himself. This is one thing that I'm struggling with right now with trying to navigate social media, because people want to see who you are. They want to see you backstage. They want to know what kind of food you eat or the new pair of shoes that you got. And that seems silly to me. I feel like, grow up. Like, if I go on social media and I tap on some stories from my friends, I kind of lose respect for them a little bit when especially if they're posting often of their meals, their vacations, their this, their that. But I took a really intense social media course. It was a 6-month-long coaching course where I had like a coach assigned to me. And that's what they advised me to do. You know, take a picture of you backstage and talk about your life, or you're waiting at the airport for this and people want to know that. And just feel like, grow up. Like, there's so much really good art out there. There's so many brilliant books and good podcasts and films and TV and physical artwork. There are sculptures that go, like, see stuff that someone actually worked on. It just feels so strange to me. And I'm not sure that I want that. I want to be myself. In fact, I'm quite personal and intimate in my shows. And I think it's because I know that we're just there for that moment and everyone will disperse and go on with their lives. Whereas with this podcast, it's higher stakes. Even though I'm sitting alone in a closet, this is actually higher stakes, because potentially, it's not super likely, but potentially thousands, millions of people could hear this. I don't know. Isn't that weird that it's easier for me to be intimate in a room with 300 people because I know it's temporary than by myself rambling in a closet? I've wondered that in comedy. Now is revealing who you are the rule and not the exception. And I feel this way about actors because if you get a big role in a famous film, right, you can kind of be aloof and mysterious as an actor because they're making their money from distribution channels that are already established. They don't have to sell themselves. Julia Roberts doesn't have to convince people to watch whatever movie. Maybe that's not a good example because she's quite famous. That's what's nice about acting is you can show up, you read the lines, you do the part, and then the work sells itself. It's not up to you to try to get people to come to it. However, for comedians, you have to sell yourself a lot. And I'm not just talking about on stage. So many of my friends are comedians, and I only got Instagram after I started doing comedy. So I actually am not connected to people from my former life, but it really is a very different life that I had before I left the Mormon church and started doing comedy. So my high school friends, my church friends, university, old jobs I've had, those people don't follow me on Instagram and I don't follow them. It's kind of its own thing. I haven't connected it to my Facebook. There was a time where I would get messages from friends and, oh, what are you up to? Oh, you're doing comedy. Oh, I want to see some of your clips. I've changed my profile picture so that only someone that actually knows me would know that it's my account, but I don't want to link the personal life that I had from years ago with the comedy life that I have right now. All of that is to say that the people that I see on Instagram are typically my fellow comedian friends. And most of their stories are, buy tickets to this show next week, almost sold out, only 3 tickets left. I'm coming to Amsterdam in May. And it just sucks. Comedians don't want to have to do that. So I think there's some envy with actors that aren't, hey guys, check out this film, you're going to love it. Someone else is doing that for you. So there are a lot of downsides to being a stand-up comedian. There's upsides as well. I enjoy making stuff that delights people. It's very fun to be silly and to make people laugh. That is definitely the number one benefit for me of doing stand-up. But I feel that way about, it doesn't have to be stand-up. It could be a book I've written, a podcast, a painting, a song. I just like making things and connecting with people in that way. Stand-up is good because it is a less crowded field than, say, authors or painters or musicians. Because in those creative industries, you can hide behind your work. But in stand-up, you are the work, you're the painting on the wall. And so there are a lot more people willing to write books because they might never have to make eye contact with people that have read their book. But stand-up is a lot of eye contact, especially clown. Clown is very dependent on eye contact and audience feedback. So there are less stand-up comedians, so there's less competition. However, like I said, you also have to sell yourself, and it's not that fun. I feel like I'm at a crossroads right now that I want to make funny stuff, either by myself or with other people. But the late nights, the poor eating habits, the time away from my family, there's a lot of alcohol in stand-up. I don't really feel the draw, but I'm also at a level right now where it hasn't really been an issue for me. I'm not expected to drink a lot. I think once I get to a point where there's a lot of free alcohol presented to me and I'm with my peers and they're all drinking as well, I think I would feel more pressure to drink more. For example, the only time that I really drink on a more regular basis is when I go to Edinburgh Fringe, and it's a very social thing. It's because I go to hang out with my friends, and in the UK, they do drinks in the round. So if you walk up to a table, they go, oh, what are you having? And you order a drink for everybody and you bring it back. And then, 30 minutes to an hour later, another person stands up and says, what are you having? And then they go and get drinks for the table. So in those settings, yeah, I do drink more. But it's not that way in the United States. We're not buying each other drinks in the round at little bar shows and whatnot. So what's interesting for me starting stand-up after being married and having 3 kids is that I have a really nice home life. Home is fun for me. So the past few years, I have been grinding like a comedian in their 20s. And sometimes I remind myself that for someone who's 23 and doesn't have a lot of money and maybe has 3 or 4 roommates, it's actually better for them, more social, more enjoyable, to be out every night with your comedian friends. And for me, being at home is just as enjoyable as being out. In some instances, more enjoyable. And so I've debated what success in stand-up would do to my family life. An exclusively stand-up career, or maybe I would say a predominantly stand-up career, is going to mean that I'm gone a lot. And earlier this year, I went out and did a few different shows in other places where I had to fly. I did a couple of shows in Utah. I went over to London and down to Baltimore for a couple of shows. I think the biggest downside for me traveling, other than being away from my family and potentially the cost, it's not so much the late nights or the being away as it is the cut into my creative time. I find when I'm on the road and when I'm flying to gigs, it's harder for me to get into a groove where I will write at the airport. It's actually quite fun for me right now. It's fun for me to have an away show where I'm out on the road for a little bit. It's a fun change of pace, but I also notice that I don't get as much done creatively speaking in terms of writing or playing my music or things like that. I'm not sure a career in stand-up is what I would really want. Do I really want the lifestyle of it? I underestimated how much it would require of me because it's fun and new and exciting to me. But it's the whole be careful what you wish for kind of thing. I actually really enjoy going out each night and doing stand-up. I find it very enjoyable. But when the travel time to get to that show is so long, it does start to add up. It's one reason that I love the Edinburgh Fringe. If you are a listener who doesn't know what this is, it is a month-long comedy festival in Edinburgh, Scotland. Performers go. Typically, they bring an hour-long show with them. And performers could be comedians. There are also theater companies, circus companies, clown, spoken word, poetry, some music. I wouldn't call it a music festival. I'm trying to actually think of any bands that have gone there. It's not common at all. And then there are a bunch of different variety shows that show up. Sometimes it will be a comedy showcase, but then there are shows like live D&D game show where there's a panel of people in the front and they play D&D and the audience interacts. There are a couple of bubble shows where a performer is good at making big bubbles, and these are shows typically for kids. And then I think, don't say this, Leah, you could ruin someone's life. Apparently, does anybody know that meme? One of the bubble guys that came to Fringe, and I heard this secondhand, I didn't see a news article about it or anything, so I can't confirm that this is true. But during one of his shows, a bottle of bubble solution tipped over and he slipped on it and fell on a baby, which absolutely feels like something from the mind of a Tim Robinson sketch show. It feels like a 2-minute clip from I Think You Should Leave, which is one of my favorite sketch shows that's going on right now. It's such a bizarre, it's sad and tragic. Apparently the baby was fine, so I want to put that out there. But oh my gosh, we were laughing so hard at this bubble guy who I think took a day or two off to examine his life and his choices. It's such a juxtaposition between something innocent and delightful and then this dark, crazy thing happening. Anyway, I guess if the baby was fine, then it's not that dark. But it just reminds me of sports movies where, you know, someone is, I don't know, they're a basketball player or something and they lose their temper and they hit their coach or something, and then he's in a coma and they're like, oh no, I let it get too far. And it's just like, maybe I should have thrown in the bubble towel years ago. Like, I don't have what it takes anymore. Like, how could I have made such a rookie mistake of leaving an open bottle of bubbles on the stage? Anyway, I'm sorry that I didn't do that story justice, but I'll have you know, I was absolutely losing my mind with Liam Withnail was the person that I was talking to about it. He's another comedian. We had a laugh over that. Now that I'm in my closet alone, it doesn't seem that funny and I feel like a horrible person. Maybe that's why stand-up comedy feels easier to be vulnerable, because if you say something and get a laugh, it kind of loosens you up. But now that I'm in this solitary room by myself, it feels heavier than a grown man falling on a baby. Okay. Is that enough? That's enough. Let's talk about persona on stage. Adam Bloom, #legend, so great. Loved Adam Bloom. He wrote a book called Finding Your Comic Genius, and one of the sections is about persona and going through your material and finding what common themes or maybe like personality traits show up over and over to create your persona. I don't think it's a contrived thing. I think when I bring this up to people, it sounds like a comedian sits down and they go, okay, my two dominant traits are being very educational and condescending. And then a third trait that sometimes pops up is paranoia or something. It doesn't really happen that way. For me, I had been doing comedy for a bit and I went through all of my bits and I tried to see what the tone was, what the angle that I had. And I found that I tend to be preachy, naive, and then sometimes kind of cheeky, subversive. A lot of this stems from what I called a purity complex, but I've been reading Lisa Marchiano's most recent book called The Vital Spark. This is a book a friend gave to me. I love Lisa Marchiano. She's a Jungian analyst. She's actually based in Philadelphia. She has a lovely podcast called This Jungian Life with two other Jungian analysts, is into Jung and dream interpretation stuff. Sent me the book. So I really enjoy it. If you're not familiar with Jung, I'm not going to get into it other than to say a big thing for Jung are stories and archetypes. And so any fairy tale or even a movie or a novel, but fairy tales are what Lisa Marchiano brings up a lot, because there's the idea that a story that has existed for generations or centuries has some perennial truth in it that we can learn from. The idea is that you take a fairy tale and you separate out archetypes, and in so doing, you can find parts of yourself. It helps you talk about your own strengths, weaknesses, shadow side, complexes, things like that, when it's something outside of yourself. The last chapter that I read was about Snow White, and then she mentions the Wizard of Oz and this innocence complex, and how Snow White is innocent and she gets things for being beautiful and naive. But eventually, at least in the German version of Snow White, she turns. And the person that she turns on in the Disney movie, I believe the evil queen is a stepmother. But in the German version, if I'm remembering correctly, is her mother. And when she figures out that her mom has been trying to kill her, eventually at the end, she has her mother put in hot iron shoes and makes her dance in front of everybody. I'm sure most of you know the original German version of a fairy tale, like a Grimm's fairy tale, is pretty grim. There's usually something shocking at the end, like cannibalism or murder, drowning someone in the ocean. The reason I called it a purity complex rather than an innocence complex is that I was willfully innocent or naive because I felt like it kept me pure. There was a quote that I liked when I was a teenager about the need for keeping ourselves pure and clean by not listening to music or watching things that were impure because they would be stuck there forever. So if you eat food that's impure, as gone off, you will vomit it out. You'll get food poisoning. Your body has a reaction to something that's not good for you. But as I like to say, the brain can't vomit. Or maybe in more memeified terms, I can't unsee that. So I prided myself on not partaking in anything by keeping myself pure. And by so doing, could be innocent and untouched. I found a lot of identity in that. But the twist is that I wasn't a stranger to dark things. I had older siblings that when they were teenagers experimented with a lot of adult things. I don't think my older sister or brother would care that I divulged that they tried sex, drugs, and alcohol when they were teenagers. I don't think they're going to mind that. They've probably even posted images of them as teenagers partaking in these things. So I don't think that they will find that embarrassing. In fact, my sister, my brother, and my mom are pretty chill whenever I've asked them about family stories or to get them to confirm details or to ask if I can include something from their personal life. They're usually like, yeah, say whatever you want. They're really cool about it. I knew that things were going on, but I deliberately chose to turn a blind eye or to put my head in the sand when it came to stuff like that. So I don't know if the innocence that I had really counts as a full-blown innocence complex. But as a way to stand out from other people and to be, I know this sounds weird, but a more attractive mate, the fact that my parents divorced when I was a toddler really impacted me, and I made a promise to myself that I would do everything that I could to marry somebody who would stick with me and would stay close to the Lord, as I put it as a Mormon, that I wanted somebody that was very religious, very devout. Whereas with my parents' marriage, and again, respecting their privacy, both of them have admitted to me that there were things that they saw when they were dating the person that they, yeah, I mean, we all do that, where you try to decide if something's a deal breaker. So it's easier, perhaps, when you divorce to say, yep, I saw that coming, than when you've stayed together. And so I became obsessive about being pure so that I felt God would guide me to the right person. It's the idea that you can't attract what you aren't. So if you're a chain smoker, it's a bit silly to demand that any partner that you're with is a non-smoker because you're not living that yourself. You could demand it, but you might not find a lot of people that think your chain smoking is okay and don't feel judged or upset that you don't like that they smoke, if that makes sense. I thought this was an interesting section that she had about trauma. This is from page 76 of The Vital Spark. The Scottish psychoanalyst Ronald Fairbairn noted that abused or neglected children have two choices. They can either believe that their parents don't love them and that they are alone and defenseless in a frightening world, or they can assume that they are deficient, unworthy, or bad, and therefore deserve the treatment they are receiving. The second belief is far less frightening because it gives us a sense of control in a chaotic and terrifying situation. We think that if we just work harder and try our best to be good, our parents will love us. If the problem is with us, there's still hope that we can get what we need because we can work to fix whatever is wrong. Although we have no reason to expect that anything has changed, we go back to the same disappointing relationship or situation, hoping that this time something will be different. Such an attitude has poignantly been called relentless hope. I don't think I'll get into it right now, but hope is interesting because it was something that I loved as a Mormon. There's even a talk by John S. Tanner called Blessed Hope that I loved. I printed it off. I memorized passages from it. I loved it. And I listened to an interesting Blind Boy podcast where he was talking about Pandora's box, and the last thing in the box that came out was hope, and how hope is destructive and can be a horrible thing, which runs contrary to my upbringing where we're taught faith, hope, and charity. The problem that I see now with hope is that much of what I did as a Mormon was in hopes of it paying off eventually. Now, I'm not saying that this didn't give me discipline and intention in the things that I chose, but there was always this far off eternity or the next life that I was living for rather than right now. The choices have consequences. You know, this idea that everything I do today is going to affect not even my future in an hour or a few days or a year, but eternity. In fact, I had a quote on my wall that said, "As if you could kill time without injuring eternity." I had another quote that I liked Every moment of my life must be holiness to the Lord. Why would someone want every moment of their life to be holiness to the Lord? One of the problems with Mormonism and this idea of dedicating every moment of your life to God and doing your best is that you're never done. You're always striving, and you can't take a break. Or at least you can't take a break without some sort of consequence for taking that break, for having missed opportunities. So it really fed into this obsessive compulsive pattern that I had about wanting to keep myself absolutely pure and clean. And part of it was because it provided a sense of security for me. There's definitely the feeling within Mormonism that the more righteous you are, the more faithful and obedient, the more God has to honor your requests. In some instances, it becomes a bit transactional. The way I describe it is vending machine Jesus. The more quarters of obedience you put in, the more candy bars of blessings you get. And it's tricky because you'll meet some very faithful people who completely devote their lives to God, and then their child gets sick and might not survive it, and so they up the ante and people pray for them. This person's been so righteous and faithful and their child still passes away. Then, hey, I thought you were going to answer my prayer. And so that's handled by saying, we don't understand God's purposes and why things happen. And that makes sense, but it contradicts the other stories that you hear. It kind of flies in the face of other things that you hear in church. I'm thinking particularly of tithing stories. Tithing for Mormons is 10%, and it's 10% of, as it's put in the scriptures, your increase. So some people debate, is it your gross income or your net is it your gross income or your net income? And I've actually heard talks where they say, well, do you want the gross blessings or the net blessings, right? So you'll hear stories about people who had no money left. They were down to their last $100 and they needed to pay for rent, but they hadn't paid tithing. So they decide to pay the $10 tithing and be short on rent. And as soon as they got home, there was a random check that came in the mail, or someone had delivered a bag of groceries, or the landlord said, you've been such a great tenant, I'm going to give you the next 3 months rent free, or something like that. There are so many stories about tithing and people who had faith to pay it, and then they got these blessings. And so it's hard not to see it as a transactional relationship when you hear so many stories like that. I never wanted, when something disappointing or devastating happened to me, I never wanted to wonder if it's because I couldn't have been a little bit more faithful. So you can see why it has been so freeing since leaving Mormonism. I think this is because my image of God was kind of a jerk. I used to think a clipboard God who's always looking down, checking the boxes, seeing if I'm doing what I should. And if I am, then I can get blessed. But if I'm turning my back on God, well, then I'm on my own. And that's, I don't know. I don't like that. I think it's very interesting that I began this podcast by lamenting that I can't make this without it having eternal consequences. And then how good it feels to leave the Mormon church because I don't believe in the same eternal consequences and this tit-for-tat deity. And yet it's easy for me now to imagine that the podcast decisions I make today might bite me in the butt in the future, because that's how I lived my life as a Mormon, wondering if I lie about this thing or I cheat in this way, then is it going to bite me in the bollocks later? I actually don't have bollocks, but I like the word bollocks, and I know it's sort of a swear word a little bit. It's a minor swear word. It's one we don't use, and it's one that Americans don't really know how to use. But I'm working on it. I've been focusing on how to conjugate the word bollocks lately, and it's a good one. The Irish use it in so many different forms that it quickly stops meaning testicles and starts meaning anything you want it to. And maybe that's how I'll end this, by saying I feel free, just like the word bollocks can mean whatever it wants to mean based on context. I can derive meaning from whatever I'd like, and it's very freeing. Maybe that's why I took a stab at doing another episode of this podcast, just to throw it out there as an act of free will and creativity. And just like by leaving Mormonism, maybe a huge mistake. I might really regret recording this. But it's done. Don't think the irony of how this podcast is ending is lost on me. The podcast that began with me complaining about social media and parasocial relationships, and how I resent the fact that comedians are expected to be vulnerable and reveal their soft underbelly to the masses. I just finished my first iteration of Best Cult Ever at my work in progress show, and used the materials from that to apply for my Fringe venues for 2025. And I got my first offer, which I'm very excited about. I got a late afternoon time slot, which is perfect for me. I do work a day job. I have children. I have a spouse. I like playing music, and I also enjoy sleeping and going out and either being on a show or an open mic, just to keep my stand-up muscles strong. I had the privilege of seeing Rhys Darby last night. He was in Philadelphia, and I'm going to be honest with you, I was a bit concerned because I have seen people who've made it big in Hollywood, in being in a lot of movies and shows, and then they come out to do stand-up, and it feels like a money grab to someone who's out there grinding and writing stand-up and working really hard. And then you have someone like Pauly Shore show up at Helium and pack out the place and have no jokes, but just a bunch of name-dropping celebrity garbage. It feels a bit wanky. So I love Rhys Darby as a creative person, but I wasn't sure, with all the many projects that he has on his plate and the things that he's doing, I wasn't sure how tight his stand-up would be. I'm just going to say I was a naysayer. But now I'm a yay-sayer for Rhys Darby. I got to see him do stand-up last night, and it was fantastic. First of all, he had a face mic, which is exactly what I love. My show is quite physical, and I've debated if I can get away with a corded mic or one that is on my face, because I move around so much, and navigating the cord while I'm out there just seems like an extra hassle that I don't want. Also, I want the ability to use my hands. Anyway, it was beautiful physical comedy. It was so whimsical. There were beautiful through lines and callbacks throughout the whole show. He was delightful and energetic and everything that I thought he was. Do I have a parasocial relationship with Rhys Darby? I don't know if I do, because I actually met him in August and got to hang out with him. That's what I'm saying. I don't drink a lot right now, but I do drink at Fringe because I get to hang out with so many fun people. So I have met Rhys, I have talked to him, and to see him perform was so delightful. I don't feel like I have a parasocial relationship with Rhys Darby. It was such a fun show. People loved it, and it was a testament to the fact that comedy doesn't have to be laughs per minute, joke, 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 punchline, 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 over and over. He used his body to communicate a lot of the humor, and it was lovely. It was very clowny. But then there was a storytelling element that was especially delightful, because most storytelling comedians, it seems that they're telling true stories about themselves. But Rhys Darby made these long, layered, complex stories with subplots and different characters, and some of the characters weren't even human. They were like a Roomba vacuum robot.
And he really won us over to the point where you felt empathy for those characters. An American audience to do so, they went, "Aw," at certain points, which was very sweet. You see that more in UK comedy shows where they've been conditioned to respond or emote because of panto culture. It was so fun to go, and I salute you, Rhys Darby, Kiwi legend, amazing comedian. I will end this podcast by wishing you a really lovely day. It was sunny here. It's warming up. I know that won't last. I'm sure we'll have a cold week next week or the week after that. But today I really enjoyed it. It was a lovely walk to feel the sun on my face once again. I hope whoever's listening to this, I guess you made it to the end of this podcast, so you liked it enough to listen to the end, and I appreciate that because I know this wasn't scripted, but I will try to squeeze in some time to script things, maybe, eventually, sort of.